Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a show about music, education, and technology. I'm your host, Robbie Burns. Hey, welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk. This is episode 93, and this is a solo episode I've been wanting to do for quite a while now, and I thought it would just be great since a couple of episodes ago I went over with Jay the general kind of like widget lock screen customization of my home screens kind of aspect of my computers. What I thought I would do today is talk just kind of about like what apps I'm using, especially since on this show I cover a lot of apps and I cover a lot of different kinds of workflows that I do with those apps. And sometimes I'll bounce between different apps and talk about it on the show. But every now and then I think it's good to do a little bit of a check-in on like what stuff is actually sitting into my current work. Not so much like what is the new thing I'm trying, but more like what is the everyday daily stuff that I cannot live without. So what I thought I would do is open up all of the things that I use every day in my teaching and professional life, and then talk about things. I'm going to kind of go at this for the most part for like what are the things on my home screens and docks, because those are typically organized based on things that I need to get to often, or they're important enough that I don't want to have to think about getting to them. So I leave them in a really easy to tap place or an easy to click place. And I figure that'll be the springboard for discussing some of my workflows and getting into all of that. I'll talk about some extra things as well and go from there. But first, I want to say thanks to all of the Patreon supporters of this show. It is absolutely motivating and absolutely helpful to have your support. This show does require some tools, some of which actually I'm going to talk about in this episode, and tools cost money, and the Patreon support does cover the hosting of this show amongst some of the other things I use to get it done. So thanks to the continued supporters. If you want to support the show, you can support us over at patreon.com/musicedtechtalk. You can join our Discord, and we have a good time. We've been talking about actually one of my news and mini topics for today, which is Apple's announcement that the Apple Creative Studio is a thing that will exist. And that is actually, I'm looking forward to testing that. That's going to launch tomorrow. And I don't know, we just had a lot of snow in my area, so I might be on my second consecutive snow day tomorrow. I'm waiting to hear from my district. So I might have some time to play around with it. This is basically kind of came as a surprise to me, though I kind of expected that Apple has been cooking up something with their professional apps for a while now. So effectively what they announced, their creative professional apps, Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, Main Stage, Compressor, Motion, will be bundled in a subscription thing, including now Pixelmator, which is an awesome Photoshop competing app that Apple bought a while back. They will be releasing an iPad version of Pixelmator, which I'm excited about. And then they're kind of like now including the iWork apps, Pages, Numbers, and Keynote into this creative suite. But they're also including Freeform, which is kind of like an open format whiteboard app that Apple makes that I actually really like, that integrates some of the familiar tools of iWork, but kind of in a more free way where you're not as limited by slides, words and spreadsheets, though those can be components of a freeform. So what's interesting is that all of these apps are going to stay in the App Store and be for sale to the previous capacity that they were before this bundle happens. So if people want to subscribe to the bundle once it comes out, you just get all of those apps, and all new features going forward are a part of those apps. But if you don't want to, I'm happy that Apple is leaving up the previous versions of all these apps on the store. So, for example, the iWork apps remain free for all users. Logic Pro, Final Cut, all of those Creative Pro apps that cost money can still be purchased as single one-time purchases, although they will be separate entries in the App Store. And actually, the new Creative apps that are part of this subscription have new icons, and people have all sorts of feelings about those on the corners of the internet where I spend my time. I don't think they're good personally, but so Apple's going to kind of fork these releases. Kind of interesting. They have been not super clear what features will go into the previous existing versions of these apps going forward. Like, for example, one of the reasons why iWork is in this bundle is that you will get, if you subscribed, you will get, as part of Apple Creative Studio, the apps themselves, which are free, but also some AI features. There's going to be new templates, which I'm actually kind of excited about. But what's unclear is will any of those features ever make their way into the free versions of the apps? Likewise, any further updates to the Apple Creative Studio version of Logic Pro? Will the standalone version get any of those features as well? Or is this a way that Apple will slowly sort of funnel people to the subscription model by not really updating those other apps? I don't know. I know a lot of people who depend on Logic and Final Cut and probably don't want to subscribe to it and would probably be pretty disappointed to have to pay monthly after over a decade of free updates, which, by the way, Apple's Creative Pro apps, you can, as far as I know, still get the $200 education bundle to get Logic Pro, Final Cut, Motion, Main Stage, and Compressor, which is an insane deal for those standalone apps. And I don't remember when I bought that bundle. I've just been getting free updates for a long time. Alternatively, some have argued that by, having these be subscription apps, that perhaps this could be actually a good thing for these apps. This could show Apple that people are serious about it, or this could fund continued and more rigorous development of these apps. The bottom line is that it's $2.99 a month for a student or an educator, and slightly discounted if you pay by the year. That's cheaper than the iPad version of Final Cut or Logic, which already have been mandatory subscriptions. And I've typically toggled them on and off just because I every now and then will need it on my iPad, but not really. I don't really depend on it just because I find that the iPad versions of, in particular Logic, are missing some core features I depend on. That being said, for a fraction of the cost of one of those two apps on iPad, to now get all of these new features and to get Pixelmator Pro on the iPad, which is something I've wanted for a while, I'm going to probably jump into this and likely leave it toggled on and report back more information once I've had some more experience with these apps. I'm wondering, it seems like no, but I'd love to see, it would be cool if they put Pixelmator on the iPad as a standalone purchase. Doesn't seem like they're going to do it, though. It seems like they're very much trying to compete with Adobe. I have mixed feelings about this. I do feel like the iWork apps being indisputably free on macOS in particular has been a humongous, awesome feature of using the Mac. Hey, you get a work office suite for free. You don't have to think about it. You just have it. So I don't know. I'm feeling a little bit mixed about it, but mostly kind of optimistic and excited. So I will report back once I've had some experience with it. Notion, the sheet music editor, the scoring app that for a long time was one of the only ones you could get on iPadOS. They have been long ago were bought by Fender, and it has recently been rebranded on all of the app stores out there as Fender Notion. And I know some Notion users out there who I'm in touch with who really love Notion and have always loved Notion, and who are kind of excited that Fender is keeping this app alive and pushing it forward and doing things with it. I just thought I would mention it on the show because it happened. I don't have too much to say about it, but I will mention some scoring apps that are in my workflow when we get to the main topic. Next section is what's new in AI. Basically, we've talked about on this show before how Apple was rumored to be using Google's Gemini models for the foundation of their next generation Siri. Both companies have confirmed that. Interested in seeing where that goes. It seems like there's some rumors that they're going to update the current operating system to include this next generation Siri and then expand upon its abilities more in the fall with the new updates, but that there might be some stuff coming later this spring that shows, early signs of what they're capable of doing with this model under the hood. I'm just kind of staying tuned. I don't know that Siri can get much worse for me. I definitely do use Siri and depend on some voice things in my life. I have some HomePods. I use it on my phones. It's obviously most dependable for things like adding reminders and timers and alarms. But I would love to be able to do more by voice, because sometimes that's the thing that's free. All right. Well, it's time for the big topic. I want to talk about the apps that are in my workflow, and I'm going to start on the Mac, and I'm just going to look from left to right on my dock. Just briefly touch on why I use each of these apps. I have them kind of categorized by where they fit into my workflow. So it sort of starts with like things that are always running and are vaguely productivity based. So I've got the Finder, obviously, Safari. I bounce between Safari and Chrome. I kind of use both these days. Education apps in the classroom, like Soundtrap, for example, still do really just function better in Chrome. And occasionally I just need some of my web tools for school to work a little better and more reliably. The reason I'm currently spending more time in Safari, kind of as my default web browser, is because I like it a little more on iPhone, in particular how you can like swipe between tabs pretty efficiently. And I've been experimenting with the Apple Vision Pro, which is only able to use Safari, as far as I know. I don't know if anyone knows about any Vision Pro web browsing apps that are good. I'd be curious. I don't know how interested in testing them out. I really am. I haven't even looked to see if the iPad version of Chrome is available on the Apple Vision Pro. I'm guessing since most of Google's other apps are not, probably no. Also, using iPad apps in virtual reality has not proven to be as good as I'd like it to be. And I am, I'm spending some time in there. It's one of the only ways to watch YouTube, unfortunately, inside of Apple Vision Pro, but I'm doing it. And I think, watching video is one of the compelling things I've done in it since I got it. And so I'm doing that. And I like that my tabs sync across all my Apple devices. So I've been depending on that. In a recent effort to kind of like power use Safari more, I've been back into tab groups, and I actually set up some profiles, which if you go back a few episodes and hear me talk about how I'm using focus modes, I can actually program Safari to open up a work profile when I arrive at work. My phone turns on the work focus mode automatically when it senses that I'm at the location of my job. And then when I sit down at my desk, I can have like all different favorites and bookmarks and like be logged into different accounts. Now I still unfortunately have to be logged into my work and my personal Gmail account, because my Gmail account that's personal is how I use YouTube Premium, which is super essential as a teacher. So I got to still be logged into both Google accounts. This method has some quirks. Like I still don't love the way that Safari handles group tabs like I do in Chrome. I'm expecting that a lot of you who listen to this show are Chrome users. If you don't already know, you can group your tabs into like little segments up at the top area of your app window and then like expand and collapse them. And I like that sort of horizontal organization of them. Safari organizes them more like vertically on the side in a sidebar, which, it's okay. I sometimes prefer more horizontal space in my apps. But lately, I'm kind of living the sidebar lifestyle, especially on my Mac. I just have all my sidebars showing at all times just to be able to see everything and click all the way back, drill several levels deep back in my hierarchy and just get everything I need to be able to get at. All right, next up is messages. I've moved as much of my work out of other messaging tools like email as I can and into iMessage. It's effectively the place where I do most communication with my music team these days. If you can remember back several years and you've been listening to the show where I would talk about things like Slack and like Discord and trying these other kind of like modern day chat apps, I think the general swing of my music team is sort of back in favor of email and messages for like shorter form stuff. These bigger tools have sort of kind of like really just not, they used to be designed around making this kind of productive conversation easier. And as these apps have changed and become more focused on making more money and more focused on business users and more focused now these days on like throwing AI junk in them, I just feel like they are not as fluid for what our needs are. And of course, they're also really designed for bigger teams than teams of 4, which has always been my music team's size. So we do a couple things in Slack. It's nice to be able to organize some very like focused and specific conversation in there, like things about our field trip planning and about our budget. But a lot of that is happening in iMessage, or aka Messages. I do the thing where I sync the messages across all my different Apple devices, and that means I can do quite a lot of messaging, file sharing, productivity. There's just things typically you would think you need email in a sit-down desktop computer for. I can just sort of seamlessly do from any device, which is great. I will say that like putting a lot of productivity into the Messages app has just sort of made it second email, and in a bad way, kind of, because while the messaging platforms are evolving quickly, they don't really have all the organizational features that email does, which can make having a lot of communication funneling through there a little cumbersome at times. But it's also easier to use. There's less clicking, there's less formality, there's all sorts of less things that are in there. So it's also very effective for managing the private teaching business that I maintain on the side of work. That's where pretty much all of that communication happens these days. All right, next up is Apple Mail. Apple Mail is good. I like it. You know, it's okay. Actually, I'm gonna. I don't think it's very good. I think it's okay. I like to use, again, the focus modes to have mail show me only my work email address when I'm at work and personal email otherwise. And I pretty much just use those two email accounts. And because it can do a Microsoft account and a Gmail account all in the same app, that makes things pretty easy for me. The experience is much more consistent across all of my emailing. The main thing that it's bad at, and I think all of Apple's platforms have gotten seriously like very bad at this over the past 5 years, is search. Like searching my Spotlight on any of my devices, or just searching inside of the Messages, and in particular the Mail app, is awful. It's slow, it's unreliable, it's not really very smart about what I'm typing as my query. And in the newest Mac update, I get like pretty much no results when I search Mail, like almost none at all. It's almost as if like my computer has not properly indexed my messages, and it's real frustrating. I mean, I really would like to depend on it more. I do keep the Gmail app and the Microsoft Outlook app installed and close by for this reason, is for occasionally needing to find an email, and like they never struggle with this. So I don't understand why Apple can't get this right. So yeah, I keep those other apps around for search only. All right, next up is Fantastical. This is a paid calendar app that I used to really recommend it. I have a hard time recommending it because it is very expensive these days, but it does have a couple of features that are extremely smooth for the way that I work. One of them is calendar sets, and I can just like program a keyboard shortcut inside of the app to show me only certain calendars, and I'm subscribed to a lot of calendars. So an example of this is like all of my school calendars are managed in Microsoft Outlook, and then I subscribe to a couple of calendars that are like county-wide, district-wide, and like music-wide calendars that, you know, are happening in my school district, which just show everything that's happening in the district, musically and at my school. Things that I don't need to day-to-day like know are happening, but that every now and then for planning, it's really helpful to know. So an example of this would be like if I'm planning my sectionals for the quarter and I'm deciding like which periods of the day I'm going to have which sectional groups, it's nice to be able to hit one button and then just toggle on every single thing happening in the county and in the music department of my county. So like I can see, oh, you know what, like maybe there's like a really big middle school GT band concert coming up, and I don't want, you know, kids to be like my brass players to be playing all day long in a sectional and in band class, and then have a rehearsal after school and then do a concert. Like maybe I can plan around that. Or maybe it's like an early dismissal day, and I, you know, for the whole county, and I maybe don't want to have any sectionals that day because they're like shorter. So, I mean, there's just like lots of stuff that is going into my planning at all times. I build my calendar apps around things only that I'm committed to being at. So I like to kind of toggle with just a single keystroke between here's just like what I need to be responsible for today, and here's like everything that I might need to know in a calendar view. And so I really dig that feature. It's also got lots of other nice things. Like you can do this whole, like if you've ever used Calendly or any one of these things where you tell a web service when you're free and then you give it access to your calendars, like your iCal and or your Gmail calendar or your Outlook calendar, and then you like send a link to other people, and then they can choose when they're free, and then it kind of just like figures out when everybody's free time is. Well, Fantastical, for paying for their service, gives you that feature, and it integrates right inside of the calendar app. I don't really have to do much other than like set up which windows of time it's looking at and which calendars it's looking at to know not to like allow someone to like double book me when I have something else. And that's been really great for like makeup lessons for my private students, or just needing to like schedule a quick meeting with someone that might need to fit in or outside of the normal confines of my school working hours. All right, next up is Things by Cultured Code. I talked about this a bit in a recent episode with Teresa Hoover, who was on, and you can go listen to that if you want. This is still, I'm still on a kick for the past several years. I've moved on from more like really power apps for productivity, like OmniFocus and Obsidian for note-taking, and I've moved on to more like simple apps, while also still using complicated apps for like when they're the right tool for the job, but having my like everyday workflow be a little bit more formed around things that are easier to use, a little bit more integrated into macOS and iOS, and just overall like more focusing and centering and easier to look at and work with. Things that I'm working with, not like that are working against me. Which brings me on to my next app, which is Apple Notes. And I'm looking at the next couple apps in my dock and realizing that there are like still about 4 or 5 note apps in my workflow. And I'm actually going to do a whole separate episode on just the note apps, because between Apple Notes, Drafts, Craft, GoodNotes, like there's just a lot of things that could be considered notes that I use, but I use them for all like very distinctly different functions and features. And I actually am not even convinced that someone could make a note app that's good for every kind of note taking, because like literally anything referential to me is note. So we'll see about that. I'll focus more on those apps in the later episode. So I'm not using OmniFocus for my tasks these days, but I still love the OmniGroups apps. In particular, I use Omnigraffle, which is a chart and graphics app making tool for making my seating charts for my band room. And I make all sorts of other kinds of things in it. I've designed posters in it before, flow charts for helping myself think. And, my music team is like, it's one of the apps that everyone on the team has been sold on and like has bought a copy of. So we make and share a lot of resources internally using it. It's kind of nice. It's like, I think like, it's got a little bit of an Adobe Illustrator vibe. It doesn't do as much, but it's also like 1,000 times easier to use. So for making graphical things, it's really an essential one. Next up is iWork. Several documents that I share within my music team live in or start inside of there. My slides I showed to my students are in Keynote. We do some numbers spreadsheets. I track all of my student learning objective data in a spreadsheet. Our music library is in a numbers spreadsheet. Our rosters are in Pages. Our concert programs are made in Pages. Increasingly, we are doing things in Google Docs, but for the things that need to look nice and be easy and frequently accessed, iWork is the way. Obviously, I use Apple Photos. I've talked about it a million times, even just in this episode. I use Logic Pro for most of my editing, although I do dabble in Ableton Live. I use the iReal Pro app a lot at home in my private lessons for play-along material for teaching jazz drum set and vibraphone improvisation. I use it in my jazz band too for like having a backing track for some of our warm-up material. I love and use the forScore app still on all of my devices, including the Mac. I'm actually presenting at the Maryland Music Educators Association conference next month on the subject of using digital scores, and I'm excited to share how that continues to fit into my workflow every day. Farrago, I mentioned on here before, that's a soundboard app made by Rogue Amoeba, and I use this to trigger really easily a bunch of play-along tracks that I use in my class every day. Now, I could just put them all in an Apple Music playlist and just kind of like let them cycle through, but I like that Farrago organizes them all in an easy-to-read and see colorful grid where everything is just a super easy visual tap away. And it integrates into the Stream Deck, which is a device that I own, a hardware device made by Alago that I have on my desk at home, but I also can use the iOS version at school, which basically just means that I can like create a programmable grid of touchable buttons that do things on my computer. And that is a literal physical hardware device with buttons on my computer desk. But at school, there's like an iPad OS app that they make where you can use it as a remote to control your Mac. So I can like walk around the classroom with my iPad and trigger things to happen on my Mac Stream Deck app. Some of those things are sound bites from the Farrago app because Farrago has integration with Stream Deck. So I can like be wandering the room and like launch a play along track without even being next to my computer. And I also put fun stuff in there too, like funny sound bites and sound effects and just stuff to make class fun. For social media, gosh, this deserves an episode. I'm still continuing to be pretty cynical about social media in the world, and I'm using less of it. I do use Discord. I use Mastodon. I subscribe to blogs in the Readwise Reader app, which I love. I draft my blog posts and send them up to my blog using a Mac app called Mars Edit, which integrates with WordPress. I'm dabbling in these like AI chatbots. I use a little bit of ChatGPT and Claude's Mac apps, which are good. I've been experimenting with Gemini. I'm keeping afloat on these things. I am pushing them to productive limits and finding that they fail on some of their basic promises quite regularly, although occasionally there is a moment of glory where it'll do a thing that is really great. And I just think to myself, like, until we can make them dependably work like this is just gambling. I don't know what else to say, but they're in my workflow. Don't get me wrong. I'm doing stuff in them. I just, sometimes the thing they do most dependably is like, make sure that I didn't use too many commas in an email before I send it. And honestly, like Grammarly has been around for so long to take care of that. So, more on that to come. I use Apple Home to monitor my home and unlock my doors and amongst other things. I'm looking at it right now, in fact, to see that my street has been plowed. I've mentioned on here before, I really like the Foodnoms app for health and tracking nutrition. Looking at my dock here, I've got CoPilot, which is like a money tracking app, kind of like Mint, sort of replaces what Mint used to do. I use the iPhone mirroring app all the time. I love to access my iPhone straight from the Mac. One of the coolest features of Mac OS in years. And that kind of brings me to the end of my doc. I skipped over Apple Music. I do use Apple Music. I'm past the point of trying to use it to effectively manage my owned library of songs anymore. And I'm also past the point of even believing that I will ever have the time to take on the project of moving that stuff to another tool. If I ever did, it would probably be something like Plex, where I would get like a big giant hard drive and then just like dump all my audio files on it and then like stream it to my other devices from a home server. It's clear that like the industry has moved towards streaming these, big databases of music. And I'm like, well, lots of modern stuff is on those. Like there's just so much stuff that's not on those that I own. Of course, so much of my iTunes data has been corrupted over the years that it's almost like not even worth trying to find some of this stuff. Like I think what I eventually need to do is just move my educational dependent upon materials out of there and into some other system and then just use it like Apple wants me to use it, which is just a streaming platform. I think gone are the days of me trying to organize all things audio inside of iTunes. It's never really been for that. It was silly that I used it as much as I have for those purposes. I know that there are some Apple Music alternatives, some of which even try to like replicate that older iTunes experience. It's always funny. I remember there was a quote around the time one of the many iTunes makeovers of the past, happened, and I remember there was like an interview with Bono of all people, who I guess because he's close with Apple, but he was like, I remember him commenting that like it's so sad that iTunes is just a spreadsheet of your names of your songs, and shouldn't it be something? Shouldn't a music app be something so much more? And I remember thinking like, no, it should not be something more. Please give me a spreadsheet of all of my songs. I have so many songs. I have to find them somehow. But you know what? The industry has proven that that's not the way people want to do it. At least not the way that Apple wants to do it. All right. Well, that moves me past what's on my Mac's dock and on to some stuff that's on my iPhone. Now, I can't decide how many home screens of apps I really want to talk about here. So I guess I'll just start with the first page. So I mentioned in the previous episode, I've got the calendar and the task widget at the top of my main home screen. Apps that I have not already mentioned on the Mac, I will mention here. I've got the Sonos app, which is kind of like for listening to music in my home, but also sort of like the volume remote control on my TV. I use Overcast to listen to podcasts. Amazing app. I have a little spot that sort of alternates between Audible and the Libby app, depending on where I'm listening to an audiobook at whatever given time. I've got the Kindle app on my home screen, sort of aspirationally. I'm trying to really just engage with much more long-term media there, which is why I also have the YouTube app on there. And I try to I don't do the shorts, but I do try to engage with longer form video essays, and of course, like the multitude of educational resources that I am all day long using. Like no less than 20 YouTube videos are being used across all my classrooms on a given day. Like it's just an insane amount of video. It's the only place where video is on the internet. Pretty much it's an effective monopoly, and that's a problem, but that's a different discussion for a different time. So I leave Apple Health and the Peloton app on my home screen just because I'm finding that I am being mindful of some health trends, and just, having those things tappable, one tap away, is super helpful. Maps is really good. I keep that on my home screen. Gotta love Maps. The Drafts app, Photos, an app that can turn my car on. And then the rest is stuff I've mentioned on the Mac already. I'm looking at my second page, and it's also a lot of stuff I mentioned on the Mac. So this brings me to my iPad, which again is like a lot of similar stuff I've mentioned before. Oh gosh, I almost forgot the Tonal Energy Tuner app, which I'll link in the show notes. I have a whole episode about using that app to teach intonation in the instrumental music classroom. But it is one of the apps that I depend on quite a lot on iOS. And I do have it almost always running on my Mac, but I don't put it on my dock because the app icon is bigger than the rest of my app icons. And it really bothers me for some reason that it is not the right size. And so that is apparently a reason enough for me to not keep something on my dock. So there you have that. But yes, Tonal Energy, amazing tool, indispensable. Couldn't live without it. On my iPad, I sometimes use that as a camera feed in my home studio to see the side door where my private students enter and leave. So I've got an app on there called HomeCam, which is just the camera feature of the Apple Home app, but it just pops up any cameras you have in your home as just in a grid of cameras, kind of like a feed, a feed of cameras. And I don't know, it's just kind of a useful way to see the landscape around my house. And to see when someone's coming, so I can unlock the door for them, which I can do remotely from my studio. And so I have that on my home screen. I occasionally will watch Apple TV on my iPad, so I've got that app icon. One app that I have only on iOS that I wish I had on the Mac is Narwhal, and I have this on my iPhone and my iPad's home screens, but it doesn't have a Mac version yet. So this is a Reddit client, and I do really use Reddit to engage in a lot of my hobbies and interests and to learn quite a lot of things. And that is by far my preferred way to do it, because using the website on a mobile device is a pretty bad experience. So on iOS, there's not too many things that don't exist on my Mac, but there are a few things I haven't mentioned yet. I will mention the StaffPad app, which remains a really interesting app for scores that only is... there actually is a Mac version now. I'm not prepared to get into the scope of what it can and can't do on the Mac. It's really still a mobile Apple Pencil app experience. And I use it, I use it on my iPad. I do use the Dorico app on my iPad, which I didn't mention in my Mac section, but that's still my preferred score notation editor of choice. I do find myself on the iPad using GoodNotes quite a bit, and this is, again, part of my note-taking workflow, which I'll get into more in that episode I had mentioned earlier. And that more or less brings me to the conclusion of the apps that are in my everyday workflow. I mean, I have some things that I use more on the iPad, like the Kindle app and forScore. Obviously, it's kind of a forScore machine when it comes to my professional life. So, I mean, that kind of use case is just happening all the time on my iPad in a way where it's happening some of the time on my Mac. So hopefully this has been an interesting trip down Burns app land, and you've maybe learned about some things you've never heard of before, I will link in the show notes to this episode all of these apps. And if there are episodes where I have featured one and talked about more like how I use it or like what it does in more detail, I will link that as well. If any of them piqued your curiosity and you want to hear more about like how does that fit in to a music teacher's life, I'll put that all in there. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode and it's been a good solo episode. Again, look out for me getting into real serious detail about specifically the note apps because I've thought about it a lot and I've tried a lot of things. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. I hope you subscribe to the show and review it in your favorite podcast app. You can find me at robbieburns.com. The show is edited by Jay Matejko. Design work is by Ryan Bailey. Everything else is by me. See you next time.